Okay, so ready to dive in. Today we are tackling something that's, well, it's kind of a big deal. We're talking about universal basic income, UBI for short.
Yeah, it's one of those ideas that really gets people talking, and for good reason. I mean, just think about it. What if everyone, just by existing, got a check from the government every month? No strings attached.
Right. Like just a baseline income to help cover, well, life, basically. I know there are folks out there who think it's completely radical.
It definitely shakes things up. I mean, it challenges a lot of our assumptions about work, about social safety nets, even about what a fair society looks like.
Yeah, for sure. And that's exactly why we wanted to do this deep dive. We've been reading through this book, Universal Basic Income, Pros, Cons, and Perspectives. And let me tell you, there are a lot of perspectives. But we're going to try and break it all down for you, look at the potential benefits, the concerns people have, and yeah, just see if we can wrap our heads around this whole UBI thing.
Right on. And, to kick things off, we should probably start with why people are even talking about UBI in the first place. I mean, it's not like this idea just came out of nowhere.
Well, no, I think part of it is because of all the advancements we're seeing with automation and AI, right? I
Hmm.
mean, you hear all the time about how robots are going to take our jobs.
Yeah. And that's actually a key argument that UBI proponents make. If we're heading towards a future where fewer and fewer people are needed in the traditional workforce, well, how do we make sure everyone can still, afford to live?
Right, right. So UBI could be like a safety net, right? Like, okay, even if your job gets replaced by a robot, you're still going to be able to make ends meet.
Exactly. And that's not all. Proponents also talk about how UBI could help reduce income inequality. I mean, you'd be guaranteeing that everyone has at least a basic level of income. It could be a huge step towards a more equitable society.
And that all sounds great in theory, but I mean, I can't help but wonder, like, if everyone's getting this free money, won't people just, you know, stop working? Like, what's the incentive to get a job if you're already getting paid to just exist?
Um, yeah, I think that's a question that a lot of people have, right? Like, are we just going to create a nation of couch potatoes? But, some of the research on this is actually kind of surprising.
Really?
Yeah, so some studies have shown that even when people get this no strings attached income, they don't necessarily just stop working altogether. Some people might work a little less, maybe take more time to care for family or pursue creative passions, things like that.
Okay, that makes sense. Like, maybe it gives people more freedom to choose how they want to spend their time and energy. Not everyone wants to work a 9 to 5 their whole lives.
Right. And another point that UBI supporters make is that it could actually stimulate the economy in new ways. If people have a basic income floor, they might be more likely to take risks, start businesses, pursue education or training, things that could ultimately benefit everyone.
I see. So it's less about people being lazy and more about potentially unlocking their potential. But, okay, even if all of that is true, how do we even pay for this? I mean, giving everyone in the country a regular check from the government, that can't be cheap.
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right? Like, is UBI even sustainable in the long run? And, there are a lot of different ideas out there about how to fund it.
So, like, what are some of the main ideas?
Well, one idea is what's called a negative income tax. Basically, people who earn below a certain income threshold would receive money from the government, and people who earn above that threshold would pay more in taxes.
Okay, I think I've heard of that. So it's kind of like flipping the script on our current tax system in a way.
Yeah, exactly. Another idea is to implement a value added tax, or VAT, which is a tax that's levied on goods and services.
Right, right. VATs are pretty common in a lot of other countries.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, even with those ideas, wouldn't we still need to make some pretty big changes to our existing systems?
Oh, absolutely. And, critics of UBI argue that these changes would be too disruptive, that they'd lead to massive tax hikes or cuts in other essential programs. They say it's just not realistic.
Okay, and I mean, they do have a point. Like, you can't just magic up all this money out of thin air. You have to get it from somewhere. And then there's the whole question of, like, even if we could afford it, is UBI the best way to address poverty and inequality? Maybe there are other more targeted approaches that would be more effective.
Right, like investing more in education, job training, affordable housing, healthcare. These are all incredibly important issues, too.
Yeah, and honestly, thinking about all of this makes me realize that the UBI conversation isn't really just about economics, is it? It's about, like, our values, what we prioritize as a society.
Absolutely. I mean, it forces us to ask ourselves some pretty big questions like, what do we owe each other as citizens? What does it mean to live in a just and equitable society? Tough stuff.
Yeah, no kidding. And there are no easy answers. But I think that's part of what makes this conversation so important.
Right. In the book we've been reading, there's a passage that really stuck with me. It says, regardless of your stance on UBI, the very act of grappling with these questions forces us to confront the evolving challenges of work and economic security in the 21st century.
Wow, I like that. I mean, it's true. We can't just ignore these challenges. We have to have these tough conversations and try to figure out what kind of future we want to create.
Exactly. I mean, whether you're a diehard UBI supporter or a staunch opponent, you've got to admit this is a topic that forces you to think deeply about some really fundamental issues.
And that's what we're all about here on the deep dive,
Yeah.
right? Making you think. So, listeners, we hope you've enjoyed this exploration of universal basic income. It's a complex issue with no easy answers, but it's definitely a conversation worth having.
And one thing I'd leave you with is this. Imagine a world where everyone has a basic level of economic security. How would that change things? How would it impact our work, our relationships, our communities? It's a question worth pondering.
Yeah, definitely something to think about. So until next time, keep those brains buzzing.
See you next time.
Bye, everyone.